Hello future tech leaders, I am Sindhuja. Based on my own experience, I know that learning the right skills can shape our future. What if I say learning was as thrilled as the tech world itself? There we go. A cloud foundation, that's exactly what you will experience. From day one, you will be immersed in the interactive sessions and expert-led courses that covers most of the widely used technologies in the zone of data science to cloud computing, which brings more light to the life of a techie. I'm so excited to help you and unlock the true potential of a technology. Well, then why to wait? Let's see what it unfolds.
Now you know creative media buy has a many-to-many relationship. Because one media buy can have multiple creatives and one creative can be displayed across multiple media buy. So it's a many-to-many relationship that goes in. We have many-to-many relationships in our data. We get many-to-many relationships like device targeting, which I mentioned as variable dimensions yesterday, right? We had the entity dimensions, and then we had the general dimensions in which we had date and variable. So variable dimensions, as I mentioned, variable dimensions of operate across the workspace, and it is not specific to a single entity. What is an entity? An entity is something which has a unique entity, key entity name and entity attributes. Right. And that can be like campaign placement site, creatives itself, but then not creative. It is definitely creative idea is there, but it's an entity definitely. But do we consider it as an entity, dimension, or a variable entity? That's what that variable dimension. That's what we are discussing over here, because an entity dimension is something which shares a unique relationship with it. And then creative is also one of the entities which among them, among the creative group, definitely it is an entity because a creative idea is associated to one creative name and creative attributes if there is. But then with MediaBuy, it shares a many-to-many relationship because one MediaBuy can accommodate multiple creatives. However, one and one creative can also get displayed across MediaBuy, so we have creatives. Now, likewise, the variable dimensions like device targeting, geo-targeting, mobile, and all these things have a many-to-many relationship. Now for accommodating many-to-many relationships in our data, Datorama provides with. Datorama provides with modern fields called exchange and strategy that you see over here. Basically, exchange and strategies are nothing but empty placeholders, which can accommodate any of the dimensions which have a many-to-many relationship with the media bay. Right. So yeah, so we are good, right? So next data set that we see is conversion tags. Conversion tag is a very simple data set whereby we have like a conversion tag and conversion variable that shares a many-to-many relationship, and the main entity of this data set being conversion tags. Search keywords is another very simple stuff whereby we have the search keyword, which basically is the main entity. And that's basically identifying the main entity. Now, if you see all these buckets connect to each other, like all these data sets, the ads data set, the search keywords data set, the conversion tags data set, all these connect to each other by means of MediaBay. Because all these data sets have MediaBay as a component, not necessarily the main entity, but then we connect data based on shared entities. Right? We have discussed this earlier that we do connect data We do connect data sources together by means of shared entities, whereby we have the search keywords, conversion tags, and ads data set connected through MediaB. Going to the next topic, data modeling action. Yeah, definitely. We have the steps to categorize data. I'm not going in there anymore. Measurements, dimensions, entities, and stuff. What we do is identify the data set types and divide the dimensions into entity and general dimensions, which have the entity, key name, attribute, and data variable. So, steps to categorize data. Now we have learned about it that we divide it into measurements and dimensions. We identify the data, set type, divide dimensions, and verify relationships. Now we have not done it and done it like as a task for us in a real-time data. We have discussed about it. Now let's see in the real time how it works. So this is just like an Excel that you can have for yourself. You have the day column, the campaign ID, campaign category, placement device, impression clicks, media cost. So I'm sure you have seen a data set like this before as well. Wherever you work with any kind of digital data. Now do we see any common columns? Like you know what are the common commonalities in columns. If we pick up, like if I want to group things, what is the first level of grouping that I need to do in terms of data? First, we develop groupings, measurements, and dimensions. So measurements are dimensions. What are the measurements over here? Impression, clicks, media spend. The rest are dimensions. So we have achieved that. Now, if I talk of what are the common columns, like if I pick up one entity, is there any similar columns in our data? Like pertaining to a similar entity. Oh, campaign ID and placement ID. Right. Those are entities we want to. But then we have campaign. Campaign is campaign name. Right. So we have campaign ID, campaign category, which basically relates to the campaign bucket. And then we have placement, ID placement and placement size. Right, those are belonging to the placement bucket. So basically what the next slide mean is, I had just kept those slides for your reference. That is, whenever we see impression, clicks, media cost as part of the measurements, we tend to relate what data set it will be a part of. So we see that clicks, impressions, media cost is part of the ads data set. And it very much fits well into the ads data set parts. Now categorizing dimensions. We start with the entity dimension. So there I was like specific entities. So what are the specific entities in here? Campaign ID, campaign category, and placement ID, placement and placement size. So basically these are the two buckets in there. Now what we need to do is, now that we have recognized that these are the columns which are identical, which are like in the same bucket, we need to see or verify the relationship between. First, we want to see the relationship between entities, and then we will see the relationship across entities. When I say relationship between entities, what I mean is I need to check that campaign ID campaign and campaign category. Do they really have a relationship to be an entity? Like, campaign ID if I consider as entity key, then is campaign name my entity name or campaign category my entity attribute? To verify that, what we need to do is we need to verify the relationship between these columns. How will we verify the relationship between columns? We will see. And why do we say that? Because what we need to check is that there is a one-to-one relationship between the campaign ID, like the entity key and entity name in order to qualify, like for the column campaign, in order to qualify as entity name, it has to have a one-to-one relationship with the campaign IDs. Okay, and campaign category too. In order to be an attribute of campaign ID or campaign column, it has to have a one-to-one relationship with the campaign ID. So, basically, whenever an entity name or entity attribute is a part of an entity key, it always shares a one-to-one relationship. And let us verify that. This is called verifying relationship between entities. Now, if I want to see the relationship across entities, that does mean when we want to see the relationship between campaign ID and placement ID, and why will we do that? We will see why will we do that, but that is called verifying relationships across entities, right? So, as we know that entity key, entity name and entity attribute as like and we want to check that what all qualifies as entity name and entity attribute. Again, an entity key can link to only one entity name value and relate to only one attribute for that entity. So how will you do that? So what we will do is we will first check the campaign IDs. Let's determine if campaign ID qualifies as entity key, and we need to see that if campaign name qualifies as entity. So what you do is there is something called a pivot table in your Excel. So this is how we actually verify the relationship. So you take your data, you create a pivot table, and when you have a pivot table, what I take over here is campaign ID and campaign name. So what we see is campaign ID and campaign name has a one-to-one relationship because under every campaign ID we see one campaign name and not two or three, right? So it's a one-to-one relationship. So each ID will have one value of campaign name exists for one campaign ID. Next, we need to check if campaign category is my attribute. So campaign ID and campaign category get selected now, and what we see is there is only one value per ID. So campaign category as qualifies to be the attribute of the campaign ID, right? So we can say that campaign category is an attribute of the entity campaign. Now the next comes is placement ID and placement. So because we have the placement bucket in there as well, right? So what we would do is we will check the relationship between the placement ID and placement. And what we see is we see one value of placement at the one placement ID. So it shares a one-to-one relationship. Moving on to placement size. Moving on to placement size as well. We see one value of placement size per placement ID. So again, it's a one-to-one relationship. So we can say that for the entities of campaign and placement. Campaign and placement has one entity, key entity name and entity attribute. Placement as well, ID is the entity key. Placement name is the entity name and placement attribute is the placement size. Okay, cool. Any questions? No, none from my side. Okay. So campaign and placement in the ads data set. As we mentioned, we have one campaign associated with the media. Buy and placement is synonymous. So, but now we have the campaign and placement sorted and we have verified the relationship. But what we need to verify is placement column qualified to be called as media buy or not. So for that, what we need to do is we need to check the relationship across entities. As in campaign IDs and placement ID. Correct. So let's pivot it again and what we see is campaign ID and placement ID as one value. So per campaign there is one placement only. So as we said media buy is. As we said, media buy is the lowest level of granularity is media buy or placement. So we see that per placement ID, we have one campaign ID. So it can be mapped to media buy. Now we have worked with the 6 columns, campaigns and placements. The three columns. What we have now, we are left with day and device category. So how to work on that date? Date goes into the date variable. You remember, right? And general dimensions, we have date and variable. Correct. So date gets classified into the date variable and we map it to date. But device category, now we need to check the relationship and see if device category, as we have already discussed that device category is a variable dimension which shares a many-to-many relationship always. So if you check device categories relationship with placement ID, again do a pivot, take placement ID and device category and you see that one ID has 2 values. Naturally, right, because a campaign gets displayed in desktop and mobile and laptop. So per campaign we see that there are 2 values. One ID has 2 values. So that does mean that it's and if we see from the other side as well, that we see that device category has 2 values for placement ID. Hence it is not an attribute of placement ID. Correct. So what do we do about it? We classify it as a variable and device category and geolocations, and all these things get mapped as a many-to-many under the data model fields of strategy, exchange of traders. So now we have classified all the columns, right? We are ready to map them. So mapping doesn't look like this anymore, but this is the old view. Like mapping is the same, everything is the same. Does that you have an update which makes it look a bit different. So what we have learned over here is what is the data model? How do we categorize our data measurements? Dimensions, entity keys, names, attributes, days and variables, dataset types and relationships. Any questions among these topics that comes to your mind currently? No, we're not. So now let's do something. This is a superstore data. Now this is a superstore data. Have you ever heard of superstore data? It's a common example that comes when you do your Tableau or when you whenever you are doing any kind of trading, it's a very good data set to work with. It is available. What I'll do is I'll provide it today with all the things that I supply you with today. We will have an exercise, we will have some guides, some PDFs, some handbooks. When I do that, I also attach the Superstore data for your reference, and you can go ahead and, categorize it yourself. Now this looks like a real-time data, but can anyone tell me that? What is the difference between the other data set that we classified and this data set? It's everywhere, it's many dimensions. There are only dimensions of the No, okay. You see only the dimensions, but there are, we have measurements. There's many to many relationships. Many to many relationships. Relationship we have not verified yet, so we don't know what is the relationship. We need to create a pivot and verify relationships. What else? First, look what you see and you understand what is the difference between the other data set and this. We have only single entity. Then we have a person. No, we have entities, right? We have the vendor entity. We have the order. We have ship modes customer. See, there are IDs and we have the related things, right? There is no like this. Data looks like this is not belongs to digital. Exactly. Digital marketing data. Correct. That's the correct answer. So this is not a digital data. In the start of the training, I was telling you, right, that people say that it's a marketing intelligence, digital marketing intelligence tool. But no, it's not only marketing intelligence tool, but it also helps us work with other sets of data. Now, this is purely an order data set, like how much this is basically. Yeah, like it's a sales data and or the order date, because this works with order IDs, right? So how much of orders and how much? What are the orders in there and what are the ship date, ship mode, customers, segment, country state, and then I'm sure there will be measurements like sales and stuff. So it's purely an order data set and it's not a digital marketing data set or an ads data set that we have seen. Right. So let's see, what are the commonalities in here? We have vendor name and vendor IDing one of the entities. Order ID. Of course, this is a sales data sheet, so order will be its, main entity. If we check it in that manner, so it will be, this is order ID, order date, ship date, and ship mode being being the common factors, because orders and shipment is something that comes hand in hand when the order was done and what was the ship mode and what was the ship date. Customer segment and customer name is one of the common factors that we see over here. And then country, city, state, postal code. These are some of the variable dimensions that we have in the data. Right. And what else do we have? We have the product category, subcategory, and product name, which is basically a part of the product entities that we are guessing. We are not sure, right? We are guessing now. How will we be sure about it? We will be sure about it when we verify the relationships. Thank you. Sorry guys, very sorry about it. I had an Amazon guy banging my door like anything. So yeah. So we have these are some of the dimensions that we are guessing that these are part of the sales data sheet and they are together. But we will verify relationships and then we have the measurements like sales, quantity, discount and profit. Right? So let's check the relationship within entities. So within entities, when we want to check, we have again going back over to this, whereby we have the order date, ship mode and ship mode. These are the order ID, order date, and ship mode. Right. So what we will do is first we will check that if ship mode is, there is only one ship mode per order ID because that should be the way, right? There can be only one shipping mode for one order. IDU order 1, IDU order, one place, one order. There can be multiple options while choosing the ship mode, but when it gets chosen, it is only one ship mode, right? So we need to verify that if ship mode is an attribute of the order ID column, and then what we do is a pivot and we see that, once coming in 0 is something, it just ignore the 0 because that 0 is nothing but the blanks that got selected while selecting. So just ignore it. What we see is only one value per order ID. So ship mode can be an attribute of the order ID. Next, vendor ID and vendor name. So it's pretty easy because it's only this much of data that we see. We see that, per vendor ID, there is only one vendor name. So when the name is, of course, an attribute of the column vendor ID. Coming to product ID and product name. So we see that product ID and product name has a one-to-one relationship again. So we can say that product name and vendor name can be the entity names for their respective entity keys. So next, coming to product ID category and subcategory. Remember we had the product ID. These 4 columns where the product tab is popping up. So product ID, category, subcategory and product name. Let's verify product ID and product name as 0, 0 and 1. Now let's verify if category and subcategory qualifies to be attributes of product ID or not. So when we do a pivot table, what we see is yes, there is only one value per product ID for one category, one value for category and subcategory per product ID. So category and subcategory can be an attribute of the product. So there comes my end to the end to checking all the columns that were pertaining to the certain IDs in the data. Right. So we now know that what are my entity keys and what are my attributes for those keys. Now, when we have that, what we will do is we will check the relationships across entities. But while we go for across entities, and why do we do that? All those things we are clear, right? What we are aiming towards and what we are trying to do in here. We know we are good. So I'm counting on that. We are good till now. So now what we know that we have verified that you know that. We now know that what all columns are the attributes for the specific entities. Now we need to check. Now it's a sales data, so order ID. I'm counting on order ID to be the main entity because that's where it starts, right? That's an order ID should have what we had told earlier, that an order and an entity becomes the main entity when it is the most granular part of the data. Correct in any of the e-commerce business. If you consider the sales funnel, it starts with an order. You may have all those awareness consideration. Forget it. Now, when the conversion happens, what is a conversion? What is a checkout? Once you do a checkout, it's basically the order ID or the order being placed in Amazon or in Flipkart or in any of the like. You know the e-commerce websites that you use. The first step is order ID. So order ID is, I'm considering order ID to be the most granular part of the sales data because once order ID is generated, everything else starts off. Correct. So now we need to verify that. How is order ID related to the entities across? So now what we are doing is we are trying to see the relationship between order ID customer name and segment. Customer was. So order ID and customer ID are two different entities in my data. Correct. Now what I am trying to do is I am trying to check with order ID and customer ID that how are order ID and customer ID related and their attributes. Now I know that customer name and segment. We had verified that customer name and segment are some things which are part of the order ID, which are part of the customer ID and their attributes of the customer ID. Right now we will see how order ID and customer ID is related to one another. Now when I do that, we see that we have only one value. So when we have one value, we can say that the entity customer ID, customer name and segment are attributes of order ID. So then we go ahead and check what is the relationship between order ID and vendor ID. And we see that it is a one-to-one relationship between order ID and vendor ID. Because one order can be fulfilled by only one vendor. However, when we go ahead with vendor ID to order ID, one vendor has lots of order IDs to fulfill. So one vendor ID is one order ID is attributed towards one vendor ID. But one vendor ID can cater to numerous order IDs. Right. So you order a shoe from your e-commerce site. Your shoe order has one order ID and that is fulfilled by only one vendor that you choose during your purchase. So if you take an example I've seen for the two respective e-commerce sites with their vendors called Cloudtail and UUS retail and stuffs. So CloudTail being a vendor, what it does is it fulfills my order. So one order ID that I place is fulfilled by a vendor called CloudTail. There are other vendors, but then I choose CloudTail and CloudTail fulfills it. So it's a one-to-one relationship. However, if I check CloudTail's point of view towards order IDs, as I placed an order, Praveen placed an order, Anil placed an order. So when we all have placed an order and it is being fulfilled by CloudTail. So CloudTail being the vendor ID, it caters to numerous order IDs. So it's a one-to-many relationship. Yes, perfect. Now have we seen such kind of a relationship earlier in our ads data set? We did, right? So a campaign to media buy had a one-to-many relationship. However, a media buy to campaign had one-to-one relationships. Right. Just try to remember the model when, like you know how to classify your data. Just try to remember the model when you are classifying any non-digital data set. Even so, if you know the model and if you have verified the relationships and if you see that what and how I can translate those relationships into the framework that I have as ads data in an ads data set. So it will be very easy for you to map your data. This is a non-digital thing, but if my concept is clear, then I can go ahead and map it to the respective placeholders. And I can work with non-digital data as well. So next comes order ID to product ID. So when I check order ID to product ID, an order ID can have multiple products. So you may have added to your cart 5 or 6 items and you choose it, I choose 2. When you check it out, what happens? One order. There is one ID, but there are 5, 6 products that you have chosen right at a single time. And then for a product ID to order, ID relationship as well. What happens? One product ID can be one product ID as in, like a product, right? That can be related to many order ID. So many of us can order a red shoe from Gucci maybe. So one product ID is attributed towards many order IDs because it shares a many-to-many relationship. And one order ID can have many products in it. So both of these select a many-to-many relationship. If we translate it in terms of the ads data set model, then did we see any column that used to share a many-to-many relationship? Did we see any many-to-many relationships in the ads data set? We did right. Creative was the creative shared a many-to-many relationship with Medivine. Yes, we know that Exchange also share many-to-many. So Exchange and strategies are placeholders that can facilitate your many-to-many relationships. So here again we see many-to-many relationships coming in. So if I am mapping these columns in Datorama, I can map it to creative. I can map it to exchange, I can map it to strategy because those are the placeholders for my many-to-many relationships. Perfect. So now we come to that point where we are classifying a non-digital data set. But we are trying to model it or using the Datorama Data Model. We are trying to put it into the framework for ourselves. Now a vendor can has a one-to-many relationship with the order ID. Order ID is my main entity in the non-digital in my sales data set. Correct, translating it back. Media vein is my main entity in my ads data set. And campaign shares a one-to-many relationship with the media vein. Likewise, site also does it. So what I'll do is I can go ahead and map vendor to campaign, order to media vein. And then again, order and product shares a many-to-many relationship. And when we translate it, media vein and creative also has a many-to-many relationship in there. So what we can do is we can go ahead and map product to creative, order to media vein and vendor to campaign. And I'm good with my data modeling because I've verified the relationships. I found my entity keys. I found my entity names. I found my entity attributes. I've classified all the similar entities with their own name and attributes. I verified the relationship between what I'm considering as a main entity and with all the other entities at place, and we see that all other entities are attributes of the main entity. So I'm sure that my main entity is good enough. I verified the relationships between many-to-many columns, which share a many-to-many relationship with the main entity. And when I'm sure from all the angles that I know my entities and the relationships verified, I can go ahead and map them to the Datorama Data Model. And we should be good about it. Is it clear? Are we good? Do we understand what we are trying to do over here? Yeah, got it? Okay. We are good, right? So we will be taking formulas later. But in the start of the session, I was discussing a callis function with someone who had asked me about what to do about it. This is a very small example. It's a recorded session, right? When we do formulas and when we check the other types of formulas that are there, when we do the extract and all those formulas. We will check it then. But what happened to me was I was about to forget about this formula. So I kept it in a slide. I know it's irrelevant for now, but then it's not. Nothing is irrelevant, but it all stays back. So it's nothing, but it's a callis function that I was talking about the other day in the starting of the session. So a common example of mapping formula is callis. So what happens? You get your data from your account manager or anyone who gives you data. So you see your old file which you ingest every month. It has a media by key in capital letter M, right? Capital M, capital B, capital K. But by mistake, what this guy has done in the new file, he has kept all those in small letters, right? Now, if you do upload it, Datorama won't understand this and it will consider it as a new column and it won't ingest. So for that, as it is case sensitive. So for that, what we do is we go to the media by key, the mapping field. And what we do is we go to the formula field of the mapping field and we write a function called callis. And what we define the two columns, the old one and the new one. So that Datorama understands that what if you see both these things in there? Both the things mean the same to us. And what Datorama will do is it will first, go to media by key with the capital M, fetch the values and it will like, okay, this is there. And then go to the second value and say, oh, okay. So if I see things in small letters as well, what I should do is I should consider it as part of the media by key column. And what I do is I append those new data that has come in, and nothing goes from this for us. Okay, so callis function comes very handy. So if you face any situation whereby you need to use it, perfect. So as we have seen, once you log into your data, once you log into Datorama, you get a connected mix analyze and actually visualize. Now let's see how connected mix works. Okay, so suppose I do a create new. And I have total connect and I have the API is there. Right, so I go to total connect. I get an option on dragging and dropping. So what I do is I'll go ahead and drop a file over here. So when I drop this file, what Datorama will do is it will say, okay, this is the data that I have. So what Datorama does is it automatically. So if you're on Tableau, you will also see that a first preview screen comes up, right? Whereby you can do your manipulations and all these things. But over here, what I'm doing is a simple mapping how it works. So here you give your data set name. So you dragged and dropped. You placed your data set in there. Now you give it as a test underscore mapping. And you see all these have been identified that day. Column. Date is classic. Date is, date is taken as a format of date. And then all the text has been taken as strings. They are string format. And then you have the number format, impression clicks and video calls. So if you go to a next, I'm sorry, I have a question here. I'm sorry. I have a question here about that. Can we add a new column while importing the data? We can. Yes, we can, we will do that. We will do that. So once you do a next, what happens is firstly you see Datorama has identified the data set. And what it does is it recognizes your data set as ads data set. Right now you may say, how about that? If I don't want it to be an ad status, if is something that you don't want to be an ad status, it does something and you want to see any of the other things. So you can go over there. There you get. If you go over here, you can see that there are types of data sets that you get to see when you go to the data stream types. You see it's add data set search keywords, add verification conversion tags, web analytics event, tags pages, e-commerce conversion tags, messaging by data, competitive products, social listening, whatever you can gauge from your side and whatever you think can be the data stream types. It is present. And then so we know there is a color combination. Sorry, I didn't get you. When you click on the switch data setter, there you can see different color sets, green, yellow and red. Yeah, these. Yeah, that's because why is that? Why is it toggled for these? Because search keywords and ads data, search keywords is part of the components of this data set is present in ads data set and search keywords data set. So that's why this data set is also on, because you see campaign, you see placement, you see clicks, media cost, impressions and search keywords as well. Right. So that's why this data model is also on in here. So it's showing like most matching data set. Yes, but thanks. We know after mapping, like sometime can we come back and change the data stream type? You can know after mapping. You can. What you can do is, but then you have to go for a remapping again. Okay, because you change your data set. What happens is the placeholders get changed even right there. If it is changed from, anything like from an ad data set to, you feel that it's a web analytics, though it's not a web analytics. It won't be giving you fields to map. But if you want, like, I will do it as a generic data stream. So what happens is then all these main entities and sub-entities get changed to generic names. Yeah, so what I do is so. So these left side columns that you see now, these are coming from the raw data. And these right side columns that you see, these are all data model. How will you separate them? You see, it comes with a symbol of model fields. These come as CSVs, ABCs. These are the strings and these are the model fields. So basically, you are just putting these values in here to the model field so that we can map them correctly. So when we say that a key or an ID, that key ID is mapped as a key over here. Okay, let me do a small thing. That is, so if you want to unmap something, so this is mapped when you have and say you want to unmap. So this is unmapped, you just click over here. Your campaign key gets unmapped. Then again you go back here and go ahead and check campaign key. You can do this and you can apply it over here. Now, as we mentioned, call is function. So how will you do call is function? So you go over here and there is your formula editor, and what you do is you go ahead and write the function over here and the formulas. Formulas we will take up later. This is just to give you a mapping experience. So mapping happen now. So then there are fields called custom attributes. So what are custom attributes? So suppose you have identified columns which are attributes of the media by key. So when we say attributes of the media by key and say, suppose media by size is over here. So say anything like placement, dimension, placement, whatever. Like those things are parts of the placement ID, which is basically comes under the media by key. Now each entity is blessed with a custom attribute mapping. So if I go over here, I can see that there are empty placeholders for. And these are like media by custom attributes. So if you want to map anything like these many columns won't be there in your data set always. Then there are media by custom attributes. So you can go ahead and map your external field, whatever you want to as media by custom attributes. And you can see that there are around 40 custom attributes that per entity has. And then there is. And what you can do is you can go ahead and map your custom attributes. Similarly, campaign as well. One sec. So similarly, campaign also has. So you see, so we were mentioning about exchange and strategy, right? So you see, exchange custom attribute strategy, custom attributes. So these are basically for your many to many site media buy. You have all these custom attributes. Come here like, okay, so these are the custom attributes are nothing but all the attributes that you see as a part of an entity, because entity attributes can be many. Right. Whatever attributes qualify to be a part of an entity, you can map them all into the custom attributes columns. Then you have your measurements in here, and so on and so forth. Here you can quickly write a formula and map it to a column. So we will do that. We will do that when we are there. But from where we started off was. So when we are doing this mapping right over here, we need to be very much sure about the data model that we map it to. But if we have one-to-one relationship wherever we are, one-to-many relationship, we need to be careful of that part. And then many-to-many relationships and creative strategy and exchange columns we do. These things have been done. Yeah. So now if you have, from here you can just check our data stream types as dataset as verification. We have seen that. How to do that. Mapping and unmapping. Also, we have done the left and right of the model field. There can be unmapped fields which you need to map. Yeah. So, you can create custom fields by using formulas. And you can map your device and stuff. So, if you have mapped your device and if you want to write any formulas, you can go ahead and write a formula. We will do formulas. This is not something that I want to spend much time now. This is a small thing. This is like whenever you are in a data set and whenever you have mapped your data, always to go and verify it from the paper table. Because that's how you know that you have mapped it pretty well. And whenever there are custom columns coming in, you need to be pretty much aware of what are custom columns and how to deal with custom columns. And how do they deal with your native columns? This is very important. Why? Because think about a situation whereby you have created a calculated dimension or a calculated measurement. Now a calculated measurement is created at a workspace level and not specific to any particular data stream. What I mean is when you create a CPC calculation in your custom measurement, when you go ahead and you do a calculated measurement, when you create from measurements in Datorama. It doesn't belong to only my data stream or Google data stream or ads data stream or anything. No, that is true for the entire workspace. In any of your view, when you want a CPC to be highlighted where there is clicks and impressions and you want CPC, you can drag that calculated measurement in there, right? So whenever you drag that calculated measurement in, we need to be sure that you know how it reacts to the native variables like impressions or clicks. These are native variables in your data set. And when you drag this column of CPC, we need to be sure that this is reciprocating well with all the already present columns in here. Correct? And when you are sure about it, then you need to proceed towards the next. So in this terms, pivoting is very helpful. Okay, so see, it got created. Now what I need to do is say suppose I have calculated measurements that I have dragged in. So always what I'll do is, once it is created, we need to go and check it in the pivot table. Right? So I need to be aware of the dates, what I have. So I have to see if I'm interested in May. So I can go ahead and May is on the selected. So I can choose a campaign name. And if you want to see how your data has been updated, so you can go over here, choose a campaign name. Choose your key campaign name and apply. So what happens? The pivot table gives you a first time. Like in 8th May to 15th May, 18th of the campaign keys and the media cost, and it gives you a total of. So what happens is now you know that. Okay, for all my campaigns that I have in my file or in my data, I'm sure that things are working properly and I am getting a first hand preview of how my data looks like. You can very well export a pivot as well. You can create a widget. You can schedule an export. You can export it as a flat table, like you created something like this, and you can actually create a widget out of it. So if you create a widget, what happens is it goes to your, whatever workspace you want it to go to, and you can create a widget. Okay, and you can verify whatever is there. Now comes this part which I wanted to touch base on, that is automating the process. So now everyone, are we good? How to create a data stream, basic one. We're good, right? Any questions? Yeah, we're good. Now comes the automating part of it. Like not automating, but hey, hi. Yeah, actually I have a question over here, like, is there any particular date format for this need to be followed? Because the date format won't be uniform from different portals. And if we compare different values between different portals, there will be an issue because of this date format. Is there any way to correct those things? Yeah, so what happens is whenever you upload in any form, be it, DD, DMM, YY, MD or any sort of things, whatever format you want to upload, you can, and Datorama recognizes it. So there is no fixed date format that you need to follow or any default date format, as in, tools like Alteryx or middleware tools. They have a specific date type that they want to. But Salesforce uses Y, MD, D, and then HH, M, and S. So whatever zone or whatever time or whatever date you want to add in Salesforce. I think I don't think, but you can basically map it to the date format and you don't need to change it off. Yeah, so in mapping itself, yeah, so if you go to date format, sorry. if you go to previous source. Now we're here. When you see your date right, your date column gets mapped in here. So if you just go ahead and check, so it's YM, DN, DHA, MMSS format, right? Now, if you want to make a change to it, you can go ahead and use any of the formats or use a custom format for yourself. After that, we are previewing the data. Can we do preview? Can we preview the data after doing API also? API connection. So that's a good question. Yeah. So with API is what we need to do is do we have this view in API? Try to recollect. I don't think so. So once you have connected your data, what happens is in API is you need to choose your respective measurements and dimensions. Because once you connect to an API, what do you after the credentials you have done and everything? What you need to do is you need to put your measurements and dimensions, and then when you have done preview screen, we need to recall that. But definitely we can do a pivot table or a widget where we get table whereby we can put the data. So we have the initial breakdown and extended properties, location and everything done. Okay, let this be as a question. I need to check if we get a preview screen. But if you don't get a preview screen as well, once you have mapped it, you can go ahead and check it in the pivot. Okay, we'll wait for this. Yes. What I'll do is I'll get my credentials in this, the Google Ads credentials, and then we will do it. Oh, once you have done all these connections and stuffs, now what you always do is go to edit, and there is something called an advanced settings. So whenever you have to push your data to Datorama, what you can do is you can mention the domain name of the user ID and password. And what you can do is you can automate the system. So suppose it's a cadence of a day or maybe in a weekly manner that you want to ingest your data in. So what you can do is you can configure a FTP domain whereby you can have the user ID and password. And what happens is automatic data pushing happens again. Retrieval. Retrieval is the same way that you can retrieve or pull data by means of whereby you can set the delivery on frequency. And you can also choose your delivery method, how it gets delivered. FTP, FTPL, Bigquery Drive, whatever you want to. You can get your data from a particular data stream. You can get your data to yourself, or you can retrieve or pull data in from a FTP server, or you can configure your email in there whereby whenever the data hits or schedules, you have your email ID and password configured. So what happens is this kind of an automation can happen. We will do a small automation for a file in this training itself, and we will see how it works. But this is how you can retrieve or you can deliver or push data or pull data from any of the sources that you have. Be it email or be it your FTP domain, and you can get the data to be pulled through the various methods. And also the delivery methods there are loads of delivery methods that are there. So we have BigQuery, we have Redshift, now we have the cloud storage, we have Drive. So we can go ahead and do the automations in our data stream. And finally, do not forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel.